Today's daf we're going to learn is Yevamot, daf samaftet. First of all, happy Pesach Sheni to everybody. Okay, we're going to get started. I just want to remind you of two things. First of all, someone asked at the end of the Hebrew Shiur, which made me think this is a good question, which is the topic that we're talking about right now. Okay, let's review the topic and then we'll get into the question, which is we had this braita, and we're going to get now to all the parts of the braita eventually today, which said about the first opinion is the one we're dealing with, that anyone, all these cases of mamzer, all those people who we call psulei chitun, right? As in addition to what we discussed in the Mishna itself, right? All sorts of situations where someone becomes forbidden to eat truma and forbidden to marry a kohen. So what they asked at the end of the shiur was basically, what's this idea that by doing an action, you can't eat truma? Like it's hard for us to understand this idea of truma. And what I wanted to make clear, because maybe to some people it's clear, maybe to some people it's less clear, is that truma is something that's considered kedusha. It's kadosh. It's sanctified. Okay, to the extent that if, for example, somebody is impure and they touch the truma and they make the truma impure, you have to burn the truma, right? You can't even, you have to burn it. That's all you can do with it, right? Then you can actually benefit from the burnt, you can make a fire and use it, but otherwise it's burnt, right? Like you can't do anything with it. It's very highly sanctified. So because of, and that's why we have shlishi for truma. Remember that normally things only are impure. Sheni, second degree, truma is even third degree. Then you get to kodshim, which is even more than that, which is sacrifices. But this idea that she's done something to basically disqualify her, just like a kohen, which again, it's another concept that's a little hard for us to understand, what he's in a higher level than the rest of us, right? We're all people, we're all part of the Jewish people. Why are there these hierarchies? And it's really a good question about, why there are these hierarchies. In fact, I was thinking about it during the parsha this week. Again, we're a little off with people outside of Israel, but Bahar, where it's all about this leveling out, right? Leveling the field, Yovel, everything goes back to its original owner, everything, right? It's this, we're all equal, but yet we're at the end of Sefer Vayikra, where it set up all the hierarchy about the kohenim, and they're different. And we've been spending all this parshiot discussing who can marry who and who, what the special rules are for kohenim. So on the one hand, we live in a society where we try to say, sometimes anyway, we're all equal, but there still are slaves and there's still right. There are people at different levels, and the kohen is treated differently. And the kohen has a level of sanctity because he works in the temple that puts him in a different place. So likewise, this eating truma is a special privilege. And if you do something that disqualifies you from it, you can't, right? This is at least the way I understand it, right? There's nothing totally clear about how exactly this works, but that's my understanding of it as to why she's not allowed to eat truma. And that's why in the end, right, they try to say, where do we get it from a drasha that will mean also truma and also disqualified for the kuna, but really it's all one and the same, right? Because both are sanctified and she can't be with sanctity because of what she did. Okay, the question today is going to be, where do we draw the line? What disqualifies her? What doesn't disqualify her? So now getting back to our topic. So what we ended with, and I have to say that the end of yesterday's daf is a little bit unclear how to read all this, because what it said was, we should read the verse. Okay, now we're back to the verse. The verse was, Bat Kohen ki tiyeh leish zar, which according to the simple reading is a Bat Kohen, like I'll use myself as an example, it's always easiest. I'm a Bat Kohen, but I married someone who's a yisrael, it's not a Kohen. So while then I could have eaten truma in my father's house, as soon as I marry an ish zar, like the yisrael, I can no longer eat truma. But the drasha was not only marrying my husband, but any sort of relation I enter into with a man who's forbidden to me, like a mamzer, and a teen, even a chalal, right? All these people will disqualify me from going back to my parents' house in the event that I'm no longer married, or in the event that, let's say I wasn't married at all and I had a relationship with a man who was a mamzer, right? I had a sexual relationship with him. So that would disqualify me from truma. Now, according to this, they say, maybe it's only if I was in a relationship with someone who is high level forbidden, right? Like not a mamzer, but like my father or something like that. But right? I'm reading now 6-7 lines from the bottom. We already did this, but I'm starting with it. Because it says kitiyeh, it means where it was a case where I could have had kiddushin tofsim, right? There could have been a valid marriage, meaning that even though it's forbidden, kiddushin or tofsim and chayve lavim, according to most opinions. And we'll get back to what about Rabbi Akiva, who says kiddushin aren't tofsim. So ki tiel ishzar hiyeh sounds like marriage. So it means the marriage was valid, which means chayve lam. Now, what's unclear about the sugya, does it mean chayve kritu don't disqualify you, which would be counterintuitive? It should be worse. It should be more disqualified. So Tosfot says, obviously, chayve kritu or pasul. The problem with Tosfot is the next question. Then, if you're going to say it's chayve lam and chayve kritu, for some reason, the Gemara thinks that Eved and Ovei Kochavim are out of that category. Okay, even though Eved and Ovei Kochavim are also chayve lam, but they seem to be in a different category. So then they say, okay, well, if that's the case, you're going to say they're not included because it's just, let's say, according to Tosfot, chayve kritu and chayve lavim, but that would seem to exclude the Eved and Ovei Kochavim. Again, unclear why exactly they think they're excluded, and then they want to know, but they're not excluded from this halacha if you have a relationship with an Eved and Ovei Kochavim that does disqualify you from marrying a kohen. So, hanach de pasle mi Rabbi Yishmael. There's a different drasha that teaches those. Where's the drasha? Now, remember, this is all if you assume, I want to remind you of this because soon we're going to get to another question. It's all going to assume that havaya means chayve lavim, okay? Because that's, again, not like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't hold havaya as chayve lavim because he thinks Kiddushin aren't tofsim there, he's going to have a different track of how to do this. We'll get back to that soon. So the Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, we're going to have a different drasha here. Minay lovei kochavim be'eved shabal ba'Yisrael ba'kohen u'leviyah, right? It doesn't matter ba'kohen, leviyah, Yisrael, all those women. If they enter into a relationship with an eved lovei kochavim, right, and actually something transpires, they are now forbidden to eat truma and marry a kohen. Shenema ubat kohen. Okay, now there's the other verse that we've been discussing, right? There was bat kohen kitiel ish zar, right? Me, I go marry my husband. I now can no longer eat truma, but then it says, but if I become widowed or divorced, then what happens? Okay, and I'll read the next words because now they're not going to discuss it, but another 3 minutes they're going to discuss them. The zera ein la, assuming I have no children, then I can go back and eat in my father's house. So what do they say here? Who's allowed to go back and eat in her father's house? Misha yeshlo amanut v'gerushim ba. Only someone who could potentially have divorce and widowed. But what do we know about an ovei kochavim and an eved? That's ovei kochavim ve'eved she'ein lo amanut v'gerushim. They're not considered almana or grusha because we don't consider their marriage a valid marriage. Their marriage is not a marriage, so they're not considered ever widowed or divorced. And therefore, the only person who can now, what is this pasuk telling you? A bat kohen can go back to eat in her father's house, in which case, only if she was widowed from a normal husband, but not if she was widowed from a relationship with an ovei kochavim, because there is no such thing as widowed from a relationship with a gentile or a slave. So therefore, she can't go back and eat truma if she was in a relationship with an eved or an ovei kochavim. That's how we learn it from this pasuk. What's the problem? Like we had yesterday. Well, what's the subject of the sentence? A bat kohen. So that would only tell you Ashkechan kohenet. That would teach you about a bat kohen only. Can't go back and eat truma, but Liviyavi Yisraeli Minala. How do we know that if they were in a relationship with an Eved or an Ovei Kochavim, and after that they marry a Kohen, they can't eat truma? That's certainly not referenced in the verse. Well, they do what they did yesterday, which is Keda'amar Rabbi Abba Marav, bat ubat. Just like he said it there, ubat came to include also the Kiti Alish Zal. She's disqualified from eating truma ever and disqualified from marrying a Kohen ever. Was referenced by the word ubat, right? The vav, the extra vav. So we say there, just like we said there, the extra vav comes to include also Leviah and also Yisraeli. Hachanami bat ubat. We'll say the same thing here. So again, they say the exact same thing they said in yesterday's stuff, which was kiman ke Rabbi Akiva, the darish bave. Is that only like Rabbi Akiva, though, who thinks that you can darshan bavs, right? Not everybody thought you can darshan every little letter in the Torah. So no. Afilu tema Rabbanan, even according to the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva and don't think that you can darshan the vav here, kula ubat krayateru. Remember, the whole topic there was talking about a bat kohen, so or the family of a kohen. So it was obvious we were talking about a bat kohen there. You wouldn't need to say that, and therefore the whole word is unnecessary. And according to the rabbis, you can obviously darshan an entire word. It's actually 2 words. It's bat kohen, right? That whole thing is irrelevant. So that was. What we did so far is find a different drasha for the Eved and Ovei Kochavim because we couldn't learn it from the Kitiyeh because there is no Havaya by them. Okay? Now, again, the problem was, well, if Chayve Kritu to include maybe them, but again, maybe you'll say Chayve Kritu. Now, it's not Kritu to be with an Eved and Ovei Kochavim. So maybe there's Chayve Kritu and Lavin where there's Havaya, where there's Kiddushin Tosim. And we excluded Eved and Ovei Kochavim where Ein Kiddushin Tofsim and it's Chayvei Lav. That's not included. So now they say, but maybe we don't need to darshan that pasuk the way you darshan it. So we learned that all out from Almana Gusha, only someone who has Almanut and Gerushim, right? Excluding them. So now they want to say, we can exclude these people from the pasuk as well, but maybe in a different way and actually come to an opposite conclusion. How so? Well, Ema, why don't you read it this way? Now, we didn't really focus on the fact if she has kids. Now we're going to put a stress on those words. Remember, it says, Bat kohen kiti almana gusha. If a bat kohen becomes an almana, a widow, or a divorcee, vizera enla. That's going to be the focus now. And she has no children. So maybe you could read it like this, and then you wouldn't come to the conclusion that we just came to. And then we'd be stuck with where do we find out about an Eved Novei Kochavim that they disqualify the woman if they have relations with her. Ve'ema, why don't you say, if, right now, we're still going to say almana ugerushim means there has to be marriage by you, but for what element? Right? Only, right, assuming she's regular marriage, the marriage was a valid marriage, and then she got divorced or widowed, and then she has no children, right? I'm sorry, and then, right, she has no children, she can't eat, but ki eat lazera loach. Sorry, she has no children, she can go back and eat in her father's house, but ki eat lazera loachla. But if she has children from this valid marriage, then she's connected to her husband's family, who's a yisrael, like me and my husband. I'd be still connected to his family, and I wouldn't be able to go back home and eat. But if I had this relationship with an Eved or Ovei Kochavim, where I wouldn't be, even if I technically thought I was getting married to them, it wouldn't be a valid marriage. Maybe because it wasn't even a valid marriage, my kids aren't really considered their kids, right? And therefore, maybe, because remember, there's no yichus by Eved and Ovei Kochavim, maybe I could then go back to eat in my family's house. Maybe it's actually better in that case for me because my children don't connect me to them at all. So therefore, that's what the pasuk is telling you. Maybe it's telling you that if I had kids from them, I could still go back and eat in my father's house. So in Cain, they say this doesn't work. Okay, why not? And then it would be obviously the opposite conclusion that we just said. It wouldn't work because ribuei leviyav yisraeli lamali. There would be no reason to have a drasha to include a leviyan yisraeli. Why? If I'm a bat kohen who is sanctified as a bat kohen in the beginning, and then I kind of messed up my sanctity by having this relationship with them, and I even have kids with them, and I can still go back to my original house and eat truma, then of course a leviyan Yisraeli who never even had sanctity to them, of course if they want down the road to marry a kohen, they could. So there'd be no reason to have this extra drasha to include that. So obviously this isn't the way to read the pasuk because there's clearly this extra word ubat, which is coming for a drasha to include other women as well. And therefore, this must not be the way to darshan the pasuk, in which case we have a good proof from where we started. Now we're going to go to the Rabbi Akiva track. Ula Rabbi Akiva damar ein kiddushin tosim b'chayvei lavim. In which case, my kitiyeh leish zal, how can he read it? Kitiyeh can't mean kiddushin tosim, which would be chayvei lavim. And then that would mean we'd have to learn the Eved and Ovei Kochavim from a different verse. So, right, because it would mean a case where there is marriage and those people are out of marriage. Well, Kitiyeh Ishar must mean Kiti Ba'el. It must mean not Kitiyeh she married. Kiti Ba'el, she had a sexual encounter with one of these people, which would mean anybody who's forbidden to her, which would include in Eved and Ovei Kochavim, which means what? The pasuk with the Almana Gusha is not necessary at all. What are we going to learn from that pasuk? So Almana Gusha Lamali, okay, according to Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't distinguish between Kiddushin Tovsim and not, he thinks none of these cases have Kiddushin Tovsim, and you have to explain they're all basically clumped together in that verse. That verse includes anything, which means we have nothing to learn from this Almanan Grusha pasuk. So what does he say? We're not going to yet understand it. We'll understand it in a minute when the Gemara gets more into it. Almana lachmir aleh ugusha lakel aleh. It specifically says Almana and specifically says Grusha to show that we're strict with an Almana in a particular way, and we're lenient with the Grusha in a particular way. Now, the truth is, we're strict with them both in the same way, and we're lenient with them both in the same way. But the point is that for an Almana, it's a chidush that we're going to be stricter with her. And for Grusha, it's a chidush. It's something unique, right, that you wouldn't have known otherwise, that we're going to be lenient with her in a particular way. Okay? Why? I'll just tell you the basis. Why would there be a reason to be more strict with a Grusha? Because a Grusha can never marry a kohen. And an Almana can marry a kohen other than a kohen gadol. But basically, an Almana is a less disqualified person to a kohen in general. And a Grusha is a more disqualified person to a kohen. So that might affect their ability to truma. In the end, we're going to say, no, they're all the same. And that's why the pasuk says, almana grusha, to show that we're strict with the almana in the same way we are with the grusha, and we're lenient with the grusha in the same way we're lenient with the almana. So how does this work? Utsrifa. And what are we learning from here? You'll see in a minute. It's actually pretty simple. It's just a little complicated to get there. If you just had almana, what might you have thought? Now remember the context of the pasuk. Pasuk is me, right, Michelle, who's married to a Yisrael. If I become widowed or divorced and I have no children, I can go back to eat my father's house. So what's this pasuk telling me, and why does it have to say specifically widowed and divorced? So it's to teach you, if you have, we're now doing the grusha lahakel, but even for a grusha, there's a leniency. What is it? If I only have widow, what might I have thought? That in alma, because I'm a widow and I have no children, that's what permits me to go back to my father's house. Why? Because just like if I wanted, I could go get married to another kohen. That would be fine because I'm only a widow. Well, that's the same thing that enables me to go back and eat truma, again, in the case where I'm no longer connected to my husband's family because I have no children. But because he died and I have no children. But aval grusha, you might have thought a divorcee, since I can't marry a kohen anymore because I'm divorced, you might have thought, even if I don't have kids, because I'm disqualified, this is what we set up yesterday, that there's sometimes a connection between disqualification for marrying a kohen and disqualification for eating truma. In this case, there isn't, but you might have thought so. So you might have thought, and this is grusha lahakel, we're going to be lenient with the grusha, that even though you might have thought, I can't marry a kohen, so maybe I can't go back and eat truma in my father's house. No, as long as I'm no longer connected to my husband's family, because I have no children, I can go back and eat truma. And yashmain and grusha, if you had said the grusha case, what might you have thought? Grusha that a grusha who still has children from a previous marriage, if I get divorced and I have children, I can't go back to eat truma in my father's house because I'm still connected. And because I'm divorced. In other words, I've got two strikes against me. Mishum de lo chazi l'kehuna, because I now can't marry a kohen. Aval almana de chazi l'kehuna, but a widow, since she can go marry a kohen, maybe you would have thought, again, we wouldn't have thought this because we know the halacha, but you might have thought, even though I have children, maybe I could go back because since I can marry a kohen, maybe I can go eat truma at my father's house. Sricha. Therefore, they come to teach you, the pasuk says, almana and grusha, to teach you, no, for one, right, you might have thought you're lenient and no, you're strict for the almana, and for the grusha, you might have thought we were strict and no, it turns out you're lenient. Okay, each one in a different case, yes kids, no kids. Okay, so that's according to Rabbi Akiva, who thinks kitiyeh already includes the Evan and Ovei Kochavim. He's going to have to learn something else from the almana and grusha case, and that's what he learns. So now they say, okay, once we already said by kiti ba'el, according to him, any kind of be'ilah that's forbidden is going to disqualify. So now they're going to mention one that doesn't. And they're going to say, why not? Remember, machzir grushato, if you divorce your wife and then she marries someone else in the interim, gets divorced or widowed from him, and then you want to marry her again, that's forbidden. Maybe you disqualify her from the kahuna and truma. And it's not true, you don't. Okay, well, she can't marry a kohen because she's a grusha, but she's not disqualified from eating truma. Like, let's say she's a bat kohen, she can go back and eat truma in her father's house. So why is that not included? Once you say kitiyez, kiti ba'el, any kind of, or even if you say chai ve'lavin, it would be also chai ve'lavin. So leish zar amar Rahman. They say, wait, remember what it said, kitiyeh leish zar. Now, your husband, even if he divorced you and you ended up marrying someone in the interim, he's still not an ish zal. What's an ish zal? Mishazar etzlami ikar. It's to forbid you to someone who you were forbidden to from the beginning. Like, you were permitted to marry your husband in the first place. He wasn't someone who was a forbidden marriage, like a mamzer, for example. It's coming to exclude someone who wasn't stranger to her from the beginning. So then they say, okay, well, if you're going to say that doesn't disqualify you, we're going to now ask a question. If you remember, chalal was in the list of people, if you engage in a relationship with a chalal, you're forbidden to marry a kohen and forbidden to eat truma. So now they say, well, what about him? Now, halal, let's talk about a halal. Halal is a child born to, let's say, a kohen and a divorcee, right? A forbidden marriage. That child is not a kohen anymore, right? Can't function like a kohen. And their kids are halalim, but they themselves can marry anyone they want. Anyone can marry them. Even if you're a bat kohen, you can marry them. It's just that what they tell you here is, because you married him, you now, or had a relationship with him, you now can't marry a kohen. You've disqualified yourself in that sense, but there's nothing technically wrong with it. So if there's nothing technically wrong with it, right? Me'ikar, from the beginning, he can engage in a marriage with anybody. He's not like a psul chitun, like a natin, a mamzer, all those people. So he also shouldn't disqualify her, and yet he does. So they say no, because Amar Kra lo yichalel zaro ba'amav. Okay, because it says, after it says about the kohen, if he marries someone he can't marry, it says so we shouldn't disqualify his children after him, right, in his nation. Makish zaro lo, because they compare him to his children, right, he's messing up his children as well. They're going to say whatever's true for him is true for his child. So what do we know about him? Mahu posel, if a kohen engages in a relationship with a grusha, that's forbidden. He's going to disqualify her from eating truma forever. Afsaro nami posel, so his children, or chalalim, are going to have the same ability to disqualify as him. So that's why the mamzer groshato is out, the chalal is in, okay, in the category we've been discussing. If you're going to compare him to a kohen gadol, so why don't you say, before we say it, now we say, ema mishat havaya. Maybe it's only if the chalal marries her, but not if he just has a sexual encounter with her. Dumia de kohen gadol ba'almana. They say no, because ma kohen gadol ba'almana bibi'ah, af hainami bibi'ah. No, because an almana to a kohen gadol, for example, right, disqualifies her from just engaging in relations with her, even if he doesn't marry her. So ema adi. Now, why is that, by the way? Rashi tells us, if you look right before the lines get wide, Rashi says in kohen gadol bibi'ah u'tepasil k'dechtiv lo yechalel zaro. You can't disqualify, right, because you will disqualify your offspring. Therefore, they say kisheyesh zera chilel. Any action which could create children will basically disqualify. So that's why just engaging in sexual relations, even outside of marriage, would disqualify her. So therefore, just like the kohen gadol disqualifies outside of marriage, so she does. This woman who is a halal gets disqualified as well. So then they say, maybe it means there has to be, when they say bi'ah, maybe they mean bi'ah after having engagement. It has to be really, you went through the process of engagement, marriage, relations. No, they say, because no, tumia de kohen gadol ba'almana. Ma kohen gadol ba'almana bebi'ah lechude. No, it's just relations by itself would disqualify her. Af hainami bebi'ah lechude. Okay, so therefore we've said, again, this is all we started with, how do we know the Evet and the Ovei Kochavim disqualifies? Then we got the category of the mamzer groshato is not disqualified, but the halal does disqualify as anyone he has a relationship with, and even just a relationship, not necessarily in marriage. Now we want to go back to the braita and understand the other two opinions, which didn't really make a lot of sense and sounded almost like they were all saying the same thing. So Rabbi Yossi Omer, remember the Tanakama was mamzer, nitin, halal, all those relationships, right? Any bi'ilah, any sexual encounter messes you up. Rabbi Yossi Omer, if your children will be messed up, disqualified, right? Which would be almost all those cases, right? Mamzer, this, halal, right? They all mess up your children. Then it'll be posel. But if you don't disqualify your children, then if you have an encounter with this woman, it won't mess her up. So now they say, Ma'ika ben Tanakama le Rabbi Yossi. Sounds like they're saying the same thing. Who on his list wouldn't fall into this? So, because remember, Tanakama had a long list of actual people. He's giving a general rule. So, Rabbi Yochanan, Mitzri Sheni ve'Edomi Sheni Yikabenayu. Second generation convert from an Egyptian or an Edomite is the issue. Why? They're not allowed to marry, but their children can actually marry. Okay, we're going to see the pasuk in a minute. Dor shlishi yavo, right? Banim asher yivaldu lahem, children that they have. Dor shlishi yavo lahem v'kal Hashem. The third generation can already marry. So if a woman engages in a relationship with a second generation convert, Mitzri or Edomite or Egyptian, then their children are not disqualified. And then Rabbi Yossi would say they don't disqualify these women from eating truma. Okay? Now, they would, right, according to Tanakama, because they were on the list, but not according to Rabbi Yossi. So now they say, they both learn it from the same place, just each learned it in a different way. Tanakama saval, ma kohen gadol ba'almana shebiato ba'avera u'posel, a kohen gadol with an almana, right, what happens? Any encounter he has, right, because he's forbidden to her, any forbidden encounter, right, will be posel, right? It's forbidden relationship and it disqualifies. Who cares about the generations coming after? Afhainami posel. So this guy also will, the ger mitzri edomi dor sheni. The Rabbi Yossi savar ke kohen gadol. Ma kohen gadol shezel o pasul. Right? It's not only that it was a forbidden relationship, but his children become disqualified. They become chalalim, and he's posel. Therefore, af kosher zero pasul posel. It has to be someone that's entirely like the kohen gadol with an almana. That he forbids, right? He's forbidden to be with her, and he messes up his children. So la fuke mitzri sheni the ein zero pasul, right? So they would exclude the mitzri second generation convert who would not disqualify his children. Okay, derive, and that's the pasuk I quoted already. Banim asher yivadu lehem dor shlishi yavo lehem v'kal Hashem. Third generation can marry in. Rashba gomer kol she'ata noseh bito ata noseh almanuto. If you can marry his daughter, then you can marry his widow. Okay, now it sounds like a very complicated way to say basically, right? If his daughter is not disqualified, then the wife is not disqualified, right? You can marry her basically if you're a kohen. You're allowed to marry her. She's not disqualified from the kahuna. So again, it sounds like the same thing. It has to do with children. It sounds exactly like Rabbi Yossi. The children are messed up, right? If the children aren't messed up, then it's okay. If the children are messed up, it is. But he words it in the language of daughters. So what's he talking about? This is a very famous drasha, right? When it comes to Ruth, how did she marry Boaz? Right? Because Amoni velo Amonit, Moavi velo Moavit, right? It only refers to males. That means their daughters can marry in. That's how they justify how Ruth married, right? In Naamah Amonit. So they say, so basically he's going to take off, Rashbag is going to take off the Ammoni and the Moabit from the list. Okay, if a woman engages in a relationship with a male Ammoni or Moabit, since if she has a daughter, remember, if she has a son, she would basically end up, the son will be disqualified. But if she ends up with a daughter, then the daughter is not disqualified. Therefore, Rashbag is taking the Ammoni and Moavi off this list entirely. Just like we got rid of the Edomi and Mitzri Dorsheni, according to Rabbi Yossi, we're now taking off the Ammoni and the Moavi. Okay, that again, if a woman engages in a relationship with them, she's not going to be disqualified from eating truma, nor from marrying a kohen. So they say again, right? His children will be disqualified, and he disqualifies therefore. Now the Ammoni and the Moavi, if they have boys, they will disqualify. So therefore, they're on the list according to Tanakama. Comes Rashbag, his daughter will be a chalala, his son will be a chalal. So therefore, it has to be someone that's just like the Kohen Gadol, similar, that both of their children will be disqualified. So afshe kolza o pasul uposel, but lafuke to exclude the Ammoni and Moavi, to ain kolza o pasul, amar mar Ammoni v'lo Ammonit, Moavi v'lo Moavi. So since not all of their children are disqualified, right? Only 50%. Therefore, they're not on the list. Okay. New Mishna. We started the first Mishna with all sorts of relationships that both, right, poslim v'lo machilim. They disqualify a bat kohen from going back to Yisrael or their father's house. And if they're a kohen, they are considered somewhat connected enough to say that even though, right, or I would say like this, even though he's a kohen, she is no longer allowed to eat truma, right? So he doesn't allow her to eat truma, even though there's someone in a relationship, she's about Yisrael with a kohen, it's not enough to allow. So now this mission is a little bit confusing. It's just a lot of cases, but it's not so confusing, but pay attention because we're going to have to follow a lot of different details. Okay, this is someone who rapes or someone who seduces. This basically means any kind of intercourse outside of marriage, okay? The happens between a man and a woman who are, again, permitted theoretically to get married, but they're not permitted to have relations before marriage, or a shoteh, whose a marriage with a shoteh is someone without sound mind. Someone who's a shoteh, their marriage is not marriage at all. Okay, this seems to be different from a cheresh, who said had marriage on a rabbinic level. This marriage is not a marriage at all. Therefore, lo poslim v'lo machilim. On the one hand, they don't disqualify a bat kohen from going home. Okay, so if a woman like myself were to have a relationship with someone before I got married, let's say, it wouldn't disqualify me from marrying a kohen. Okay, it's not recommended, but it doesn't disqualify me from marrying a kohen. Or, right, as long as it was someone who was permitted to me, as opposed to a forbidden relationship, which was everything we've been discussing today. But lo ma'achilin. But if I was about Yisrael and I had a relationship outside of marriage with a kohen, that also wouldn't allow me to eat truma, of course not, right? Or a marriage with a shotet, because it's not a marriage at all. That was our whole discussion until now. If it was with someone who was not way to come into the community, not allowed to marry me, then it would disqualify me. So what's the case? Yisrael shabal bat kohen tocha b'truma. Okay, this is what I just told you. If it was the Yisrael with a daughter of a kohen, like me, I could still go back and eat truma in my father's house. However, okay, and this is a big however, ibra, if I get pregnant from that interaction, okay, right? You should always be wary of this. So if I get pregnant, then lo tocha b'truma. Well, at this point, we don't know, am I going to have a child? Now, this is fascinating because right, we know this happens. People get pregnant with someone they slept with outside of marriage. And often, right, not always, but the husband will just leave town and say, I have nothing to do with this. Now, what this is saying, very fascinating, is that if I were to have a relationship, or I'm not me, someone who's a bat Yisrael has a relationship with a kohen, okay? Now, I'm sorry, no, actually me. If I'm a bat kohen and I'm normally eating truma in my father's house, I'm not married, I have this relationship and then I get pregnant. So now I can't eat truma while I'm pregnant, because if I have a child, that links me to that guy's family and I'm no longer connected to my family, okay? I can't eat truma anymore. But if something happens to the ubar and it's not viable, then tochal, then I can go back to eating truma. Haya kohen shabal bat Yisrael. Here's the flip case. If it was a kohen who had a relationship with the bat Yisrael, lo tochal b'truma. Now here you're going to be even more fascinated. Ibra lo tochal. Okay, now she can't eat truma kolot she's pregnant, because we already learned that doesn't help her at all, right? Remember, she's a bat Yisrael, so she's not eating truma in her father's house. The only option would be in her husband's house, but she's not married. She just had a relationship outside of marriage with this guy. Well, yalda tochal, but if she gives birth to a child, she's linked to him. He can't deny it almost, right? Like she's linked to his family to the extent that she can eat truma now, okay? Because she has a child, she's linked to this kohen. It really doesn't matter whether he brings her into her house or not, his house or not, okay? She's linked to him no matter what, and therefore she eats truma, okay? Which is really interesting halacha, I think. Nimtza, and here I think the Mishna is kind of fascinated by this halacha, and they make this interesting line. Nimtza kocho shel ben gadol mishel av. The power of the child could be greater than the father. They're making like a little quip out of this, right? That sometimes the son could be stronger than the father. The father didn't connect, right? Didn't allow the woman to eat truma, but the existence of this son puts her in the Cohen's family. Very interesting. More cases like this a little bit, where the child is going to either yes mess up or not mess up. Eved posel mishum bi'ah. Okay, we already learned this. And Eved disqualifies a woman by having relations with her. That was where we started today. If he has a relationship with a woman, she can't eat truma anymore. But eino posel mishum zera, but doesn't disqualify from his children. Now, what does this mean? So this is like we just said the other case. So now, Kitzad, bat Yisrael lekohen, or bat kohen liYisrael, v'yalda imenu ben. V'halacha ben, okay, this is going to be a little bit of a complicated case. Remember we talked about the mamzer case, how the existence of her grandson, even though her grandson is a mamzer, right? She was married to a kohen. She's a bat Yisrael. She had a daughter. The daughter married a mamzer, had a child who's a mamzer. The daughter dies, the husband dies. The only connection she has to this husband is this child of a mamzer, her grandson. That is enough to connect her to the husband's family. Okay, that's what we learned, and we're going to see that in the Mishna in 2 minutes. But right now, we're going to have a similar case. Now, if you remember, Eved doesn't have yichus, okay? We don't go with lineage. Lineage is irrelevant. So now what they're going to say is, if this woman was married to a kohen, okay, she can't eat truma, she was by Yisrael, she's married to a kohen. The yalda imenu ben, okay, I'm sorry, or a bat kohen liYisrael, or me to my husband, and we have a son. Our son went, v'nichbash ala shifcha, gets attracted to some maidservant. He yalda imenu ben, he gets her pregnant. Harei ze eved, okay, the status of that child is an eved. It goes by the mother. Now, because it's an eved and it doesn't have yichus, it's not considered my son's child. Since it's not considered my son's child, it's not going to be like the mamzer case. It's going to be the opposite. So Aim Aviv, okay, so now this Eved, who's the grandson, his grandmother, which is the one I was talking about, either me or Abat Yisrael. So now we're going to do the two tracks. Ima viv bat Yisrael kohen. If I was a bat Yisrael who's married to a kohen, lo tochal b'truma. I can't eat truma anymore. Why? Because I'm married to, in other words, I have the only connection I have. Remember, my son dies, my husband dies. The only connection I have is this child from my son, who's the child of an Eved, not considered the lineage of my son, and therefore that doesn't allow me to eat truma. If I'm a bat kohen yisrael, tochal truma, I can go back and eat truma in my father's house, even though I'm still connected to my husband through this grandchild. I'm not really connected to my husband because this grandchild has no lineage and no connection to me whatsoever. But a mamzer posel umachil, and that's what we already discussed, and I just made reference to. A mamzer, though, does. Ketzah, by Israel, because a mamzer, there is yichus. It's just he's not allowed to marry him, but he is considered the child of his father. So, but because he's Jewish, right? By Israel, the kohen, uba kohen Israel, the yadai menu bat. In this case, it's not that I had a son, it's that I had a daughter. You'll see why in a minute. It's the exact same case as before, except that instead of the son marrying a shifcha, where it goes by the mother, this time my daughter married a gentile. Now, the daughter who marries a gentile, the son, now this is tricky. Normally we say the son is not a mamzer, right? The daughter marries a gentile or nove kochvi. We don't call the child a mamzer, but we just call the child a Jewish child, right? Because it goes by the mother and we ignore the father. But this opinion, the Gemara is going to later, not today, going to say, who does this go by? Because not everybody holds this way, but we did see an opinion that if she sleeps with a gentile or an eved, the child is a mamzer. And this Gemara is going by that because they're giving a mamzer case with an eved. They could have brought, if she marries her father, or something like that, but where it would be a true mamzer, according to everybody. But for whatever reason, they brought this. So if she goes and marries an eved or a mamzer, so the child's a mamzer. If, again, two tracks, if I taught Amy Mo, the grandmother was a bat Yisrael, not me, but bat Yisrael, who's married to a kohen, tochal b'truma, because remember, everyone else is dead, but she has this child from, right, that still remains. Bat kohen Yisrael, lo tochal b'truma. But if it was me, and I want to go back and eat truma in my father's house, I can't because I have a mamzer grandson that connects me to my Yisrael husband. Now comes the Mishna with the most creative case and points out something kind of ironic. Kohen gadol pa'amim shu posel. You could have a grandson. Okay, we had a grandson who was an eved, doesn't disqualify. We had a grandson who's a mamzer, right? Or right, the eved wasn't counted at all in my lineage. The mamzer was counted in my lineage. Now I could have a case where I could have a child, a grandchild, who's a kohen gadol. We'll see in a minute how, and I could be disqualified from eating truma because of that child. Okay, it's like an ironic thing. You would think a kohen would allow me to eat truma. Dafki is going to mess me up. How so? Ketzad. Bat kohen yisrael, v'yaldai menu bat. So that's me. Okay, here's my case. I'm a bat kohen. I married my Yisrael husband that can't eat truma anymore. I have a daughter. My daughter goes halcha bat v'niseit lekohen. My daughter marries a kohen, and now so she can eat truma now. I can't because I'm married to my Yisrael, but she can go eat truma because she's married now. She leaves our family. V'yaldai menu ben. Harei zeh ra'ui liot kohen gadol omer mishamesh al gabei mizbeach. Okay, he's as good as any kohen. He could theoretically be a kohen gadol if he wanted. His existence messes me up, but allows his mother to eat, right? It's this crazy thing. His existence messes me up because I know I have a grandchild still connected with my husband, so I'm considered part of a Yisrael family, but he allows my daughter to eat truma, right? And his mere existence messes me up. So Zot Omeret, someone like me would say, Lo kibni kohen gadol shu puslani min truma. Like, woe is to me that I have a kohen gadol son, I'd rather not have a kohen gadol son and I'd actually be able to eat truma. Okay, it's like a negative thing about how crazy that a kohen could actually mess you up. But now the Gemara is going to start. Tanila had the Tanu Rabbanan. So the first line, who remembers the first line of the Mishna? First line of the Mishna was a nones or mefateh, right? Someone who has a relationship outside of marriage, or a shoteh, whose marriage is not a valid marriage. So that's the one we're going to focus on right now. Tanila had the Tanu Rabbanan is braita that supports our Mishnah. Shotet v'katan shenisu nashim b'meitu. If a shotet or a katan, neither of them have da'at, they don't have knowledge, their actions are not actions. They married a woman and then died. Okay, totally different issue, but it's as if they weren't married, basically. There's no chalitza, there's no yibum, even if they die without children. Now we're going to go back to this line about her being pregnant, and we're going to compare it to other sugas where we saw about pregnancy and may raise a very big question. Ketzad, haya Yisrael shabal bat kohen tochal b'truma, ibra lo tochal. Okay, what did we say? If she was a Yisrael, this is a quote from the Mishnah, who had a relationship with the daughter of a kohen, right? He was a Yisrael, she was a bat kohen like me, okay? Extramarital relation. I can continue to eat truma unless I was pregnant. If I'm pregnant, I have to stop and wait and see. If I have a child, I can no longer eat truma because I have a child from yisrael. But they point out something very interesting. Sounds like as soon as, right, we have this relationship, I don't have to wait 3 months and say, maybe I'm pregnant, even though, right, we've seen before, you have to wait 3 months. Maybe I'm pregnant right away. It says only if I get pregnant, then I can't eat truma. Sounds like immediately after I have relations, I can go back and, go home and eat truma. Why? Right? And it's, since ibra lo tochal, shouldn't we be concerned maybe I'm pregnant for the first 3 months? Isn't it just like this Mishna we saw? If you remember, there was 2 men married 2 women, and then they ended up sleeping with the wrong woman. They took home the wrong woman from the wedding. And then we said, well, it was an accident, so they can go back and stay married to the person. But they have to wait 3 months because maybe they got pregnant from the first husband, from the wrong husband. So I'm a Rabbi Rafuna. You're comparing apples and oranges. There, they have to wait for 3 months, worried they're pregnant because it's liyuchsin chashashu, right? Mamzerim, we want to make sure we know who the child is. There, we're worried about something. The truma lo chashashu, for eating truma, we don't worry maybe she's pregnant, only if she's pregnant. To which the Gemara says, really? The truma lo chashashu, we're not worried about suffix truma. Any case where there's a suffix about maybe you can eat truma, maybe you can't, we don't say don't eat truma. Of course, we say don't eat truma. We'll show you a case. Husband gives his wife a get on tonight. He says, this will be your get an hour before my death. Okay, why does he do this? He probably doesn't want her to do yibum or chalitza, right? Maybe he doesn't want her to marry his brother or save her from the whole trauma of chalitza. So he says, in the event that I die, this will retroactively be a get, retroactive to an hour before my death. So theoretically, it sounds crazy, but you could do such a thing. But if he was a kohen, she can't eat truma immediately. Why? Because any moment could potentially be an hour before his death. And therefore, in that hour before his death, she's not allowed to eat truma. Here you see suffix, she can't eat truma. So why by us? Suffix, maybe she's pregnant. So, Ela Amara Rafuna b'nisuin chashashu b'znut lo chashashu. They were only worried in marriage that she would get pregnant, like the case where she went home the first night of the wedding and slept with the wrong guy. But biznut, here we're talking about a woman who had a relationship outside of marriage. We're not worried. Why are we not married? We assume, interesting, right, that she turned over and the semen came out of her body, okay? That there was, when you're doing it, you come up with some way, right? We would just call it, choose some method of birth control, right? In those days, they had more primitive methods of birth control. I'm not exactly sure how they work, but she would try to, in some way, prevent it from getting pregnant. So there's less of a concern that she's actually pregnant in this case. It doesn't mean she couldn't get pregnant. The Mishna obviously discussed the case where she did, but the chances are much less. So now they say, wait a minute, didn't we learn Hatanya bat kohen shenisei l'shovamet tovelet bo chelet b'truma la'erev? We have a bat kohen who marries Yisrael. He dies after the first night. What does she do? She can go back and eat truma immediately. Why? Right? Maybe she's pregnant. So here you see, we're not worried, even within marriage. Amar Rav Chisda tovelet bo chelet ad arba'im. Now they start to make distinctions. Well, the first 40 days she can eat. After that, she has to worry maybe she's pregnant. Why? To eat lo miyabra, if she's not pregnant, halo miyabra, well, then she's not pregnant. And of course, she can eat truma. The first 40 days, it's just considered water. It's not actually anything, the fetus. So therefore, even if she's pregnant, it's not really considered that she's pregnant. So even if she were to eat, it's not a problem. So therefore, what they're going to say is, she can tovelet bochelet truma la'erev, but 40 days later, she has to stop and wait from day 40 till the end of 3 months to see if maybe she's pregnant. So I'm like, but then it doesn't make sense what you're saying with the end. If it turns out she was pregnant, so basically she can eat right away, but if it turns out she was pregnant, she's messed up from before, which means what? From any truma she ate from day 0 till 3 months, she has to pay back the value to the kohen, like anyone who eats truma who's not allowed to pay the value plus an extra fifth. So it sounds like it's starting from day 1. So what do they say? No. What they mean is if in the end, 3 months later, you get pregnant, we go back and make you pay from day 40 till 3 months, but not from day 0. So in the end, we do see that we make this distinction. Okay, we're going to end with this machloket, a very strange machloket. I'll be a little surprised by it, I think. Okay, introduction to machloket Amoraim, and we're going to see that even the Amoraim had a debate what exactly the Amoraim were discussing about Rav and Shmuel. If once you're engaged, betrothed, you're not supposed to, by rabbinic law, to engage in relations. So what if you did, and you have a child, you get pregnant, Rav Amar Havlad Mamzer. The Vlad is a mamzer. Okay, that's very weird because you have relations with your, the woman you were betrothed to. Theoretically, it should be your child. Why would we call it a mamzer? Shmuel Amar Havlad Shtuki. Shtuki is milashon lishtok, to be silent. Since we don't know who the father is, if someone were to ask who the father is, the child would be silent. He wouldn't know to say. So there's a case where we don't know who the father is, which is a suffix mamzer. It's not full mamzer, or suffix mamzer. They both seem to think it's a problem. You would expect there to be an opinion that says, no, we just assume it's his child. Well, comes Rava and he says, I'm a Rava. This is the first version of Rava. Tomorrow we'll see the second version of Rava. There's two different versions. Mistaber milte derav de daime me alma, avalo daime me alma batra dide shadiname. This all depends on the rumors that she slept around. There's rumors that she slept with other people as well. Then I think Rav is right. The Vlad would be a mamzer. But if there's no rumors, and it's just that we know she had a relationship with her husband, like let's say he comes and tells us so, well, then we say it's the husband's child, even according to Rav or Shmuel. I'm a Rav Minala. How do I know this? To Katani, it says in the Mishna, Yalda Tochal. It says, remember in our Mishna, it said if she gives birth, she can then eat truma, because we assume it was from, right? This was an extramarital relation. They weren't even engaged in that case. And we said it goes by her husband and she can eat truma. So Hechidami, what's the case? If it was a woman who there were rumors that she slept around with a million people, of course, Yalda Mai Tochal, we're not going to say, oh, let's just assume it was the Kohens and let's let you eat truma. Of course not. It must be, it was, right? Rumor, she slept with him and nobody else. And when we assume it was him, even though they had no, right? Even though, in other words, she was forbidden to him and she was forbidden to the whole world. We know she had a relationship with him, so we just assume it was him and she can eat truma. And therefore, we go by him according to the Mishna. So here, all the more so, right? What would you assume? The woman's engaged to someone and she's rumored to have slept with him. We don't assume she slept with other people as well. It would be all the more obvious she slept with him. So, because in the end, he's going to be her husband. So I'm allowed. So therefore, he says, obviously, in that case, we don't say the Vlad's a mamzer. But Abaye doesn't agree with this. Fascinating. Abaye says, if she's accused of having slept with him, like rumored, and not with anybody else, we still call the Vlad a mamzer. Why? My time we assume since she was, went against the law and slept with her husband, her betrothed husband, we can assume she slept with anybody else. Very fascinating that they think this. We're going to call the kid a mamzer. And what about the Mishnah, right? That was our whole question. The Mishnah had said that, right, if she got pregnant with the kohen, she can eat truma. How could we possibly say that? Fascinating answer. He understands. It's in a case where they were both in prison together and they were the only two people there. And therefore it was obvious the child came from him. So obvious because there was no other way she slept with anybody else. And that's why we allow her to eat truma. But otherwise, our Mishnah wouldn't allow her because who knows who she slept with. Okay. So therefore, Rav comes to the right. According to this, Abaye thinks that Rav actually thinks the Vlad's a mamzer, even if chances are she slept with him. But if there's no clear proof, like he was the only man on earth, then we have to assume that she might have been with anyone else. And Rav calls it a mamzer, and Shmuel calls it a shtuki. Very fascinating. Something you would not have expected, I would think, to say. Tomorrow we're going to get to a different version of this machlokeh. Okay, we'll end here for today. Wishing everyone a Shavuot tov.